There you go.
Awesome sauce.
Can I say something to him?
Yes, you may.
Cam, this is Richard Green. I got up early to see you this morning. I can't even see you.
I was told, Richard, I only agreed to this because I was told you were still going to be in Hawaii.
You are an absolute turkey butt. I got up, busted my butt to get here, and you're not even here.
He's here. He's on.
Well, okay.
That's right. He's driving the train.
Jomo didn't tell you.
Yes.
Jomo didn't tell you it was a virtual Tim Sullivan.
That's right. It's a virtual Tim Sullivan. By the way, that joke comes from Ken Hall. He called me out this morning. I said bus. Well, good morning, everybody. It is, I believe, what are we, the 18th? Yes, it's Tuesday, February the 18th at 8:01 in the a.m. We're at the Energy for All Alaska Task Force, and our guest, virtual guest, is Mr. Tim Sullivan, External Affairs Manager, Director for the Alaska Railroad. Looking back, I discovered that we actually haven't had an update from the railroad in over a year. It's been since 2018. So I went ahead and reached out to Tim, to bring us up to speed. And I'm trying to think of what was actually going on around that time frame. I think we had done the LNG delivery around that time frame.
Yeah, I think it was actually longer ago than that. We've done the LNG thing was back about 2015, 2016 time frame.
Good Lord, I've been doing this too long. Okay, and you too, obviously. All right, well, I will hand it over to you. Mr. Sullivan, if you please.
Well, thanks, Jomo. And first off, apologize for not being there in person. As Jomo and I were talking last week between traveling back and forth to Juneau and holidays and family travel and all that sort of stuff, it's just been complicated trying to get anywhere. So I appreciate the opportunity to do this in a virtual setting and promise to be there in person sometime soon that we can all chat. So as Jomo said, I'm the Director of External Affairs for the Alaska Railroad, so I cover our public relations, government relations, and philanthropy. And one of the things that I get to do that I really enjoy is being able to talk about the railroad. As you can see from this picture, and I was talking about it a little bit earlier, this picture is from 1923 or 1924, not quite sure, but it's one of the first trains that was making the full run between Anchorage and Fairbanks after the Golden Spike was put in 1923 in Nenana. So it's, as we talk about coming into the 2020s, it's nice to reflect on where we've been over the course of the last 100 years and use that as a little bit of perspective as to where we're going. So getting started here, it wouldn't be a railroad presentation if we didn't start out with a safety minute and talk about the way people drive in Fairbanks. This is a picture from last summer in our yard where somebody decided to take their BMW and launch it into our yard where it came up resting against that fuel tank. So, this isn't particularly a railroad safety piece, although there happen to be railroad cars and tracks in it, but just more of a driver safety and stay away from the tracks and watch out at crossings. But in terms of real safety minute, it's people on the tracks that are our biggest issue. You got some people who decide to do all sorts of crazy things on the railroad tracks, and frankly, the one that bothers me and most railroaders the most is this idea of kids walking down the middle of the railroad tracks and parents who think they're close enough, but really trains move at a speed that nobody, that is really deceiving, and they're particularly quiet. People complain about the noise of trains, but that's after the train has gone by, not before it gets there. So really encourage rail safety and for folks to stay off the railroad tracks. We're not trying to keep people from getting from one side to the other since we bisect the state, but if you got to cross the tracks, go perpendicular, go quick, and don't hang out around the tracks, whether it's you, your kids, your dog, or if you're planning your yoga class. Let's not do that in the middle of the railroad tracks. I'm going to stop here for a second and just say, if you guys got any questions, just give me a shout. I'll stop anywhere along the line. I have a tendency, and Richard can attest to this, I'll just talk and keep going for a while unless somebody puts a governor on me. So let me know if you've got any questions as we go along, and I'll be happy to stop. I know most of you have seen this slide before. We've been using it for a while in our presentations. It's a pretty good coverage of what we consist of. As you know, we're owned by the state, but we're operated as a independent corporation. We live off our receipts. We're managed by a 7-member board, and over the course of the last about 14, 15 months, 5 of those 7 have been replaced. So we've lost, we've had a lot of institutional knowledge go out the door in the last several years between John Cook and Governor Sheffield and Linda Leary. And then the two commissioners who've been on the board before. But what we've got now is a really great group of folks who are coming in with good ideas, who've got a lot of Alaska experience, and hopefully will be leading us in a good direction as we head into the next century here.
How is the board populated?
So we have 7 positions. 2 of them are commissioners. We get the commissioners of DOT and Commerce and Economic Development. As the railroad, we are positioned under Commerce and Economic Development, not under DOT, which has actually been a good thing for us over the years, because it's good for us to be managed separately rather than as part of DOT's overall package. That allows us to be more focused on the economic development tools that we have. 5 other members are based on region. There has to be 1 from Fairbanks and 1 from Anchorage. There has to be a person with 10 years of railroad management experience, and there has to be somebody who is a business owner or manager. As well, we have a union representation on the board. One of the newest people that we received on the board is a woman by the name of Judy Petrie, who is the CEO of Farm Rail out of Oklahoma, which is a small regional railroad down there. And she is great. She's been in the railroad industry for going on 40 years, runs a short line railroad, so she has a lot of experience in the sort of things we do, and really gives us a good sort of outside perspective so that we aren't just stuck in what it is we know as Alaskans and get stuck in our own little echo chamber as we are wont to do sometimes. So it's great having her on the board. She was able to make her first meeting 2 weeks ago in Fairbanks, which was our annual meeting up there, which went great. We had almost all of our board members attend. There were a couple, our commissioners got stuck down in Juneau and weren't able to make it up, but we did have a good showing up there in Fairbanks.
Cool.
So you can see the data there: 656 miles of track, 900 or so freight cars, 44 passenger cars, 51 locomotives, about 500,000 passengers moved every year, 3.5 million tons of freight, and I'll get into both those here in a little bit. And as of January of this year, we've got 610 full-time year-round employees, and about 3/4 to 80% of those are members of the 5 unions that are here on our campus. So jump right into our passenger stuff, which is always good numbers to look at. You can see we've seen some steady growth over the course of the last 10 years. If we pulled this back a little bit further, you'd see that in 2007, 2008, those numbers were quite a bit higher. After the economic recession in the lower 48 and some tax changes that had occurred to the cruise ship industry, about that time we saw a severe drop off, but we've been climbing every year and up over 30% from 2010. A little bit of a hiccup this last year, a little drop off, but that's more of a correction after the really big growth that we saw in 2018. So with the numbers we're seeing coming, predicted by the cruise ship industry and by other travel groups for 2020, we expect that number to go up again, back about to that 531 number or somewhere in that area. And it's split up. The blue numbers are the ones that ride on our trains, and the yellow numbers are the ones that ride on our pull customers. That's Holland America Princess and their pull cars that we haul around, as well as the Wilderness Explorer cars through Premier Alaska that we haul around, and those are their customers.
We have a question.
Yeah.
Before you leave, Tim, Rick Soley, the 2019 bar chart is all blue. Does that mean that you went only to Alaska Railroad cars, or is that just a coloration issue?
No, that's an estimated number, that asterisk that's on there. We don't have the final numbers yet. We won't have those till right about the beginning of March when we complete our audit. So as soon as I get those are probably within 100 to 150, but I don't have the breakout yet as to how many of those were pull customers.
Okay, it'll be in the same ballpark though, probably.
It'll be in the same ballpark, about 50-50, 45-55, sort of the split.
Thank you.
And I didn't realize that some of the tour operators had their own cars.
Right. So Holland America Princess has a number of cars, and Premier Alaska has 3 cars as well.
So you guys run the maintenance on those things then, Tim? Or who runs the maintenance on those cars?
They do. They run the maintenance on their own cars.
Really?
Yeah, Holland America has their own little warehouse out here that they do their maintenance on. We do some of it, but most of it they do themselves.
Huh, interesting.
Cool. Thank you, sir.
So freight operations, this is not a pretty chart in terms of what's been going on over the course of the last decade. As all of you know, up there are the one that was really depressing is if you look at that bottom number of blue, that bulk petroleum number represents what was moving from North Pole, from the refinery in North Pole down here to Anchorage to feed the beasts that were the airport, that were J-Bear and Ted Stevens Anchorage International Airport. And that rapid decline there represents the shutting down of that refinery, and where we are now, those lower numbers, over the last couple of years, is what we've been hauling north in terms of refined petroleum, and those numbers are nothing near what had been that haul coming southbound. Additionally, the other one that disappears completely is that green that's right there in the middle, which was export coal that was coming from Healy and heading out to Seward. I'm sure you all know as well as anybody from the folks at USABELI that the international coal market and what's going on in China and things like that just really caused a rapid decline in that market as well. So unfortunately, those numbers starting, for all intents and purposes in 2016 just went down to zero.
Are those dollar figures, or is that weight, Tim?
Tonnage.
That's weight.
What is that?
That's tonnage.
Okay. Okay.
That ends up being millions of tons. So, we were moving about in 2011, you can see we exported about 1.2 million tons. Sorry, somehow the metric on there got left off of that slide, but we moved about 1.2 million tons from Healy to Seward. And then that just incredibly rapid decline between 2011 and 2015 was just, the basis of economics and what was happening in the world energy market.
So what we lost was southbound energy resources.
From an energy state.
Right.
Yeah.
And but what you see, we saw a big year in 2017. That was mainly because of the purple there, the gravel. We had a huge year for gravel because of a couple of really big road projects here in Anchorage. O'Malley Road, they ended up having to dig out a lot more swamp than they thought they were going to have to and replace it with gravel. Some work on the Seward Highway down here, as well as some airport work was getting started then as well. So we had a banner year in 2017 when it comes to gravel, corrected back to 2018. But we're seeing a little bit of growth in 2019, and a lot of that has to do with the growth in our interline and barge service, which we run out of in partnership with Alaska Marine Lines, the Linden operation. It comes out of Seattle. We have a barge that has roll-on, roll-off service that, and I'll get onto this a little bit more, but stuff coming from the lower 48 stays on the same rail car, rolls onto the barge, rolls off in Whittier, and then rolls all the way up to Fairbanks before getting put on a truck heading up to the North Slope. So we've seen some significant growth in that, and everything else has pretty much held steady. So we've been pretty happy about that for 2019 and expect a little bit more growth in that barge service because of activities on the North Slope, as well as we expect that bulk petroleum number to almost double with some of the stuff that's going to be going on with Petrostar here in the next year.
We have a question?
Yeah.
I was curious about the gravel. Where would that gravel come from?
So that comes from the Matsu Valley. There's a gravel pit in Palmer and one in Cashwitna. So they both come from that area and roll into Anchorage.
Are those privately owned, or is that part of the Alaska Railroad?
They are privately owned. One is owned by QAP. The one in Cashwitna is owned by QAP, and Alaska Sand and Gravel owns the one out in Palmer.
Thank you.
I'm interested in your comment regarding Petrostar.
I will come up to that in just a minute.
Okay.
I've got a slide. I got a slide for that.
Okay.
Hey, how about that?
All right. Thank you, sir.
Yeah. So, what goes along with declining revenues and everything else is having to look at how to save costs. And over the course of the last 12, 13 years, we've gone through 4 rounds of employee reductions here at the railroad. as you can see, we went from a little over 800 full-time year-round employees in 2008 to fewer than 600 in 2019. As we looked at what we were doing in terms of our business model and providing service to our customers, and the sort of where we had cut and maybe cut too deep, we actually went into replacing about 18 of those after 13 years of pretty steady decline. We went and replaced about 18 positions this last year to bring us up to 610 for 2020. And most of those positions there's a few of them that are back of the house sort of stuff. We needed another attorney. We needed a couple other just to keep paperwork moving. But you'll see a lot of that. A lot of those positions are going to be in our freight service, particularly our overnight freight service to Fairbanks, our trailers on freight cars, and our containers on freight cars. So here's the bottom line, and I'll move through this really quick, but you can see that we've been able to maintain our net income because as a corporation, we report it as net income. What happens with all that money is it all just gets poured right back into the infrastructure. We don't have any stockholders, so it just goes right back, and that plays a big part of our maintenance budget every year. You can see how the revenue breaks down, at least for 2018. We're at about 40% for freight, 20% for passenger. We get a good chunk of federal grants based on the fact that we do regularly scheduled passenger service. Our real estate covers 10 to 12% of our revenue, and then we've got the mysterious other, which is 2% of our income. There's an anomaly in that graph there in 2016 and 2017. We had a disagreement with the municipality of Anchorage over some federal funds that come in, about how those federal funds should be split. So we had a 2-year hiatus where we were unable to receive those federal funds, and then it was corrected in 2017. And the accountant said, even though that money was allocated by the federal government in 2016, we had to count it for 2017. So for the first time in a long time, we actually showed a loss in net income, which you can see that it directly translates into what we had come in 2017, and you kind of even those out, and you see that we stayed pretty steady in terms of what our net income was if you just average those two out. 2019 is coming in at about a $16 million estimate, and we're happy to be able to pour that back into the system here. And in terms of pouring it back into the system,
well,
here's
actually, Tim,
Yep.
sorry, we have a question.
Yeah.
Am I popping back?
Just one question on the income, and sorry I don't have an MBA in accounting or tax law. You don't have shareholders, but you do have an owner, and that would be the state of Alaska. And
Correct.
Of course, the 9-pound gorilla in the room is always the state budget. What does the Alaska Railroad contribute to the state budget?
Do you pay a dividend like Ada?
We do not pay a dividend.
So you get to keep your revenues?
We keep our revenues. We don't, we do not get any operating revenue from the state. We take all of what we get, and it gets poured right back into the infrastructure. So in terms of what we do for economic development of the state is we keep running.
Okay. So you guys are ring fenced then within our operation. That's pretty good.
We're what?
It's called ring fenced. There's a ring around you, and you don't need to worry about, it's self-containing.
Well, yeah, for the most part. I mean, we do get concerned. We show off this slide, and people look at those numbers and go, oh, well, maybe the state should be taking a chunk of that money. And, we have to have the conversation about what it takes in terms of maintenance for the railroad. You start looking at things like railroad ties. We have about 2 million ties on the railroad, and they last about 40 years, which means we need to be replacing about 50,000 railroad ties every year. We've got bridges that were, built in the 30s and 40s that require some pretty heavy-duty maintenance, and some of them are going to need to be replaced here pretty soon. We don't go to the state for that money. We don't go to the state for the ties. We don't go to the state for the bridges. We don't go to the state for, replacing the ballast on the railroad. We are able to do that with our own revenues.
Got it. We have another question?
Yeah, when it comes to revenue, I always think too of PTC and that effect. Is that going to be later in your presentation, I imagine?
You know, I don't have anything on PTC. I can certainly talk about it. You know, we are in good form for PTC. The deadline is coming up here at the end of 2020. We are in what's called service in revenue service demonstration, where we had to do, I believe it was 98 trips without an error. We've now completed over 350 and are in good standing with the federal government, our federal regulators, in terms of having PTC implemented.
Can you go ahead and say what PTC
Positive train
is?
control.
Yeah.
Yeah, positive
And
train
what it
control, a federally mandated safety program. You know, to really simplify it, it's kind of like a dead man switch on the train, but it's controlled by GPS and gigantic computer systems that at the point in time that Congress mandated it in 2008 didn't exist. This has been a research and development project over the last 12 years and has cost the industry, well, industry's put somewhere between 10 and $15 billion into it over the course of the last 12 years. We, as the Alaska Railroad, have put something in the neighborhood of 185 million into it to maintain this program. And really, it's been a heck of a program for us trying to figure this thing out. You know, between the amount of dark territory that we have where there isn't cell phone service, where there isn't electricity, so we have to have triple redundancy power for all of our switches and all of our signals as part of the requirements for positive train control. The fact that we were a particularly small fish in the pond in trying to get this done, you know, you look at, and there was only one contractor in the country working on it. So, you know, if we, in the company by the name of Wabtec, so if, you know, one of the bigger class 1 railroads called Wabtec at the same time we did, I can tell you whose phone call got answered first. It wasn't ours. And so we were playing catch up on a lot of this. We were able to get it done. We have the benefit of being a smaller railroad, a smaller class 2 railroad, so we don't have to do it over thousands of miles. But still, the difficulties of the areas that we were dealing with, you know, you start looking at everything north of Talkeetna and trying to get that squared away has been a heck of an adventure for our guys in trial and error and trial and error and trial and error over and over again. So we're happy to say that we are in revenue demonstration. We are where we're supposed to be, in fact, maybe a little bit ahead in terms of where we're supposed to be according to our regulators. And the big concern now is that the care and feeding of these systems that have been implemented is going to be anywhere from $8 to $12 million a year, which is going to have to just be part of our cost of doing business.
Thank you.
Yeah.
I guess on this slide, I will ask one more question. So regarding
Yeah.
real estate, that would really be lease revenues?
Yes, lease revenues.
Now, recently you guys got into sales too, didn't you?
I've got a couple of pieces that we sold. I'll bring that up here in just a second.
And when you do that, I got some comments on that.
Is that Richard?
Yeah.
No habla inglés. Okay, moving on.
Thank you, sir.
So as we talked about, you know, seeing what we're hoping is a little bit of growth and seeing that we've been, you know, trying to hold off as long as we can on repairing the things that needed to be repaired. We're working on our deferred maintenance. We've got a very healthy, big tie replacement program going on this next summer. We're going to be doing some bridge, a lot of bridge work, as I mentioned. Additionally, we're purchasing more flat cars. Our flat cars, a good part of our inventory is pretty darn beat up, as you can see in that picture in the top right. They need to be replaced. We're buying 56 new cars, and that is all going to be focused on our service that goes between Whittier and Fairbanks. So being able to have the newer, better shaped cars for our trailer on flat car and container on flat car program is going to be great. And in addition to that, that picture on the bottom right is one of our van loaders. And those were built in 1983, the ones that we currently have. We have two on the premises here in Anchorage. We are lucky when one of them is running right. The other one keeps getting cannibalized to run this van loader. So we are in the process of purchasing 4 new van loaders, 2 of them for Anchorage and 2 of them for Fairbanks, to make sure that this business line that we're seeing really steady, good growth in, and we expect to continue for quite some time, we won't be facing the the embarrassment of having, you know, the van loaders both shut down here in Anchorage because one's only partially there and we don't have enough of the parts to cannibalize off it to feed the other one. So we think by the end of this summer, or by the middle of the summer, we should have the 2 here on location in Anchorage, and by the end of the summer have 2 on location in Fairbanks. So we'll be in good shape to keep that business line moving. So land sales. So a couple of years ago, one of the things that we're required to, and we're the only state agency that is, we're required to go to the legislature to get permission to sell land. So 2 years ago, 2018, we were down in the legislature with a proposal, and the legislature approved us selling 8 parcels of land. The Tri-Valley subdivision in Healy, which we sold to the Usabelli folks, Otto Lake, also in Healy, the Chino Landing subdivision, which there's a picture of there right across from the Carlson Center, some land here in the port of Anchorage to the municipality of Anchorage, sold to the port. And then we've got a couple others that are pending. We've got one up on the hillside here in Government Hill in Anchorage to a charitable organization called NeighborWorks, and then some land sales down in Whittier as well. And Richard, what was your question?
Well, I was just kind of frustrated in that, and maybe I'm totally wrong on this, but, you know, the railroad being a state entity and it's kind of state-owned, I kind of felt like the people of Alaska are stakeholders to a certain degree in the railroad, and we have a personal interest as such, even though we don't get, you know, dividends and stuff out of it, but it was a state asset that was initially, and then it went over to being run like it's been doing, which is great. But I look at that property there and I go, you know what? There's not a whole lot of riverfront property in Alaska, in Fairbanks, that could have some kind of a good development for it. And I was vocal on this to a certain degree, apparently to the wrong people. I thought that should have been a little more public knowledge on how they thought that should be used. I know a lot of people like just seeing it virgin territory, which that's nice too, I guess. But I had other ideas for that thing as far as, anyway, just any number of things. My point being, there didn't seem to be any public input or very much of it, certainly not well advertised, about what I felt to be a public asset. And I guess maybe, is it not a public asset, the property you guys have, or how should we look at that?
Well, it's owned by the corporation, but I guess I'm kind of interested in what you wanted to see done with that. You know, we'd been trying for 20 years to get somebody to come in and use that particular piece of property, whether it was industrial or whatever, and had really no bites on it over there. You know, other than the Best Western that got put in there, there hadn't been any real. We had a nursing home that came in and that was interested for a little bit, and then they disappeared. We had half a dozen other, nibbles over the course of the last 20 years, but nobody with any serious plans about what they wanted to do with that land.
All those nibbles you got were always predicated, here again, I could be wrong, were always predicated on a lease situation, long-term lease situation from the railroad. And quite frankly, a lot of investors aren't excited about long-term lease situations like that. And that's how you've got the majority of places set up around here, Spenard included. So anyway, and as far as what I would personally like on it, would be different for everybody in here, but I was envisioning more of a, and I know we're a long way from that, but, that waterfront in San Antonio who's got multiple use going on there and residential and all kinds of business opportunities along that to be utilized. But that's a whole other topic, and I was just kind of curious as going forward, because you've already flushed this down the toilet, I think, this beautiful part of our riverfront. I'd just like to know what we have to do in the future to try to mitigate that. We got to get a hold of the guys in charge of this thing. I know John McKinnon, he's just a commissioner, but we got to get to the guys on the Senate and Bishop and those guys to pay attention to this sort of thing, or how do we change that?
Well, at this point in time, we don't have any plans to sell any more land. At this point in time, we don't have anything in the hopper. We don't have anything listed. The process of going through the legislature is an arduous one, and we're not interested in doing that again anytime soon. This was our one bite at the apple, really. So, I mean, other than this property, which that whole, that whole area there that's on that, I guess the point there between Phillips Field Road and over to Pegger Road was okayed for sale. And you can see in that picture the subdivision that we've, that we've done in terms of those first two. We've got the Chena Riverwalk Trail is proposed down there at the bottom that the city has had a permit for forever and hasn't done anything with. That's
well,
been proposed.
I think they were hoping that they might be able to do a full connection, which would be actually through those river lots.
Yep.
Are these tax exempt parcels?
Nope, they're sold.
Property tax?
They're sold. So they, when they sell, they become part of the, they become part of the tax base.
You're showing 4 sales that are pending. Are you saying that the rest of all of those lots are already sold? No, they're all sold.
So in the first section, in that first section of lot, with the green around it, all but 2 of them have been sold.
Ah, okay.
In the bottom section, in the blue, only 2 of them have been sold. So the rest of them are available.
So they're not leased?
No, they are sold.
They're to be sold. Okay. Okay.
No, you answered my question. I didn't want to get, I know that we could talk a lot on this whole philosophy on this thing here, so, and it's only 11% part of your income, so you've got a bigger slide projection to go cover. I just wanted to.
Well, I'll tell you what.
Say those.
When it comes to the amount of time I talk about issues, whether it's passenger freight or real estate takes up a hell of a lot more than 11% of my time. I'll tell you what.
Yeah, I can imagine. Yeah. For obvious reasons.
Yeah. So,
I will say, though, again, I just heard for years and years, I guess I've been up here decades, again, a desire for the railroad to make more of its land available through sale. And so it looks like that is at least a step in that direction.
And we did that. But, part of what we have to do is balance with what, we have an obligation to keep the railroad running, and that, that acreage that we bought, that the state bought from the federal government as part of the dowry, which makes sure that we are able to balance our accounts when we get through tough times.
Well,
it's like any business owner or any landowner, you look at the opportunities that are there for you, and to sell certain pieces of land, which are very good producing revenue pieces of land, when you could, it's a bit like killing the golden goose sometimes. You get the money up front, but in the course of 8 or 9 or 10 years, you would have seen a better return on it. And that's part of what we're required to do as an independent as a corporation that lives on its receipts.
Got it. Okay, thank you, sir.
Yep. All right, so heading into new topics. We've got a passenger dock. In fact, we own 3 docks down in Seward. We own a freight dock, which is in the foreground of that picture on the left there, a passenger dock, which has 2 cruise ships on it there in the midground, and then right behind there, you can see the coal dock, which is in cold storage now because we haven't been moving any coal out of Seward. Our passenger dock was built in '66, right after the earthquake. It was the replacement dock, and it is on its last legs. It's in hospice care at best. We're looking at its lifespan being about 2023, 2024. We're spending nearly $1 million a year just in maintenance on it. And we've got over 200,000 passengers coming through there every year. The cost on this is going to be somewhere in the neighborhood of $60 million as a replacement cost. And we have headed down the road in terms of a public-private partnership to get this project done. We put out a request for interest. We had several groups come in, take a look at the dock. We had 2 full days of people who are, in the international dock business. We had local Alaska contractors coming down, taking a look what they could do down there and trying to be part of this program. Where we are now is just last week we had collaboration meetings with the 2 companies that we have decided to move forward with. And they are putting together their proposals that we should have by early April to determine and to pick, for us to pick which company we're going to move forward with in terms of replacing this dock. we think it's going to be a great opportunity for, for what's going on in Seward and for the expected growth in the cruise ship industry, and to make Seward more of an option for ships to dock and do the turnaround at. This is important to Fairbanks, just in the term that a lot of folks who get off in Seward hop on the train, they go to Denali, they go to Fairbanks, and so we see this really as the place where people come into Alaska, as opposed to the folks who take the cruise ships through Southeast and spend a half a day in a port, and then turn around and go back to Vancouver or Seattle. Seward is the port where people come in to spend time in Alaska.
So how is the contract? You got a couple of you're looking at. What sort of can you do it in a nutshell? How that it's a joint effort. Is it going to be like the university up here when we built the new dining facility? The concessionaire runs it for a certain amount of time, and then it's turned back over to the state after their concession, that negotiated time frame is done, but they upfront the cost on it. Is this going to be similar to what you're doing there, or how is it?
That's probably what it's going to be. We're still, we'll wait to see what the final proposal is going to be, whether how long they're talking about running it, whether they want to run it at all, or if they just want to guarantee slip space. Those are still all to be ironed out. But what's likely is to be a lot like that dining hall, is that they'll run it for a number of years, at least during the cruise season. We'll probably run it in the wintertime for freight coming in and out. But that's pretty likely what's going to happen.
Right. Okay.
Will there be any opportunities for an aqua train connection at Seward?
Like we have in Whittier?
Yes.
Probably not. The freight dock that we have right now isn't set up for the roll-on, roll-off service. It is, it's operated by crane. So we're hoping to see an increase in freight coming into Seward to be able to keep that port open more of the time in the winter. When we stopped moving coal out, it became incredibly costly just to keep the rail line open between Portage and Seward without having a regular service going back and forth weekly. So we'll see how that's all going to play out, but no, not for the aqua train.
So I was going to make a comment in regards to Richard again, and Mike commenting on that aqua train. I didn't know what to call the bloody thing, but just this summer we went across Lake Michigan on that SS Badger, that historical rig that started out being a rail car transport. So that made me just wonder what the viability of that would be for our, up here for us. We got all these ships or all these ferries that can't seem to make it work. Is there an option to put trains on those things too?
I don't know. I don't know what we can put on particular boats. I'm a train guy. So
yeah, okay, I know. It's just interesting.
So if there are opportunities that folks want to explore in terms of moving freight to Seward, we have the facilities there in terms of our freight dock there, and we're always interested in more opportunities to be able to move stuff.
Are you going to be touching on any more development on that Trans-Canada thing that they were talking about for a while? Is that coming up on your presentation?
You bet.
Okay.
Okay, anything else on Seward?
It appears not.
Okay.
Thank you, sir.
So we talked about this a little bit. This is our barge service between Seattle and Whittier. This is one of the things that we're seeing growth in. We run one barge a week. So for regularly scheduled service of 52 barges. This year we had to run 6 extra barges in order to accommodate the amount of freight that was moving up, which was great to see. As you can see that it's really a great thing in terms of efficiency in moving freight from the lower 48. From Seattle to Fairbanks, it's an 1,800-mile roll. We also get a lot of interline service with our sister companies down in the lower 48. We move stuff from Florida, from Mexico, from all over the lower 48 for drilling materials up to the North Slope. That's nearly a 5,000-mile run where the freight doesn't have to be handled or unloaded and reloaded, where it just gets on a flat car in Florida, rolls up to Seattle, rolls on our barge, rolls off at Whittier, and rolls all the way up to Fairbanks. So it makes it for a really efficient and cost-saving measure being able to do that. So let's talk a little bit about what I'm sure you guys are interested in, talking about energy to the interior. We talked a little bit about our LNG by rail before this started. In 2016, we became the first railroad in the United States to receive the authority to move LNG by rail. We did a demonstration project in 2016. We did a lot of first responder training all the way along the rail belt, just to make sure that folks felt comfortable with it, particularly the first responders who would be the ones there in case anything ever happened to one of those trains. At this point in time, in terms of us moving LNG, it's a matter of storage and demand. If the demand grows in Fairbanks, it really becomes cost efficient and safe, and a really good way for it to be moved in terms of moving it by rail in those ISO containers. As long as the quantities are still small, it's tough to justify, one car or two car at a time getting loaded onto a train with all of the logistics that go along with it, since if we're talking about getting gas from the Matsu Valley and having to build, either having to build rail down to the plant down there, or having to truck it to somewhere else and then reload it onto a train car, it's really a matter of volume to make it make sense. And
Where do you see the line between bringing it up the Parks Highway on tractor trailer versus rail? Do you think those are comparable in price, or is there potentially an advantage to using the rail over trucking it?
Well, certainly if we could get to unit trains, where if we were just moving a train full of LNG, there'd be a lot of cost savings doing it that way. If it's a matter of us having to stop the freight train in somewhere near Houston and having to load up another train to it with 4 or 5 cars, or 10 or 20 cars, maybe 10 or 20 might make sense. 4 or 5 or ones or two.
Thank you. So it's economies of scale.
I'll ask you guys a question. What is the ROI that people are talking about now for converting houses over to LNG? Is that still, in like the 15-year time frame?
I haven't heard myself lately. Have you?
No, I haven't heard.
Yeah.
Okay.
But it's attenuated, yes. The price differential's still fairly narrow.
Okay. In addition to that, Petrostar is coming on as a big customer for us this year. They've purchased a bunch of storage at the Port of Anchorage here as part of the Marathon Tesoro merger. There was facilities that they had to get rid of. Petrostar picked them up. They are now going to be taking their refined petroleum that they've been making in Valdez and trucking up the highway. They're going to barge it around to the Port of Anchorage, load it up in their storage facility here. They've built that new rack that you can see the picture of. Actually, that's the rack in Fairbanks, but they've built a rack here in Anchorage and a rack in Fairbanks and a new storage facility up there that they expect to be moving a couple hundred thousand tons of refined petroleum to Fairbanks every year as well, moving it by train rather than by truck up the highway. So we're really happy about that. We think they're going to be a great customer. We think we can, do it efficiently, so hopefully save money for everybody all the way around and be a safe way of moving it up.
Okay. So that was the Petrostar reference.
Yeah.
Awesome. Okay. Any questions? Okay, looks like we're good here. Thank you, sir.
Okay, and then coming to the end here, Alaska to Alberta. And I know you guys have heard a bit about these guys. They used to be called Alberta to Alaska. They changed their name. They're now calling themselves Alaska to Alberta. We signed a master agreement with them last year to work together on getting the right of way between here and between you guys and the border, get that all squared away. It's going through the 460 process, which is the portion of state law which explains how DNR is supposed to get land for a railroad extension to the border. They are still working on the presidential permit, A2A is, to allow for a crossing between Canada and the US. And we are just kind of sitting, waiting to see what they are going to do at this point. The last presentation that I saw by Sean McCoshen, who is the guy who runs their operation, he was at the Resource Development Council meeting in November, and he said that they are out looking for investors. They are still doing an economic studies, and they expect to be go, no go in 2 years.
With what kind of timeline for opening it up to traffic? 10 years? 15 years?
I think it would be all of that. The environmental impact statements and all the environmental studies are going to take a big chunk of that time. Once that's done, then, and if the money is on board, they can go like gangbusters. But that preliminary of getting the environmental studies done is going to take several years. And they'll build it in.
Picture over on the right.
That's
that-
the longest Alaska.
Yeah, that's our, they got it
Oh, that's the, oh, okay.
down by, yeah.
Yeah, that's the bridge down in Salcha.
Yep.
Bridge to nowhere.
It's down to the training space, boss.
Well, yeah.
Somewhere.
3,300 feet.
What about any discussions as far as running the line further north, which I've heard bandied about from time to time?
So that comes up. That comes up about once a month. Folks start talking about that. What it would take to do that. We have a study that's about 30 years old that was done on taking a look at on getting that done, running it up to the slope. At that point in time, it was about a $7 billion project. And the environmental information on it, out of a 400 or 500 page document, is about 8 pages. So things have changed quite a bit. You flip that, and that's what you get for the, if we had to go through that process now. So it's certainly an opportunity. Hindsight being 2020, when the slope was getting started, it certainly is something that we should have done then. Whether it's something we should do now, would really take a lot of crunching of numbers to figure out if that's a way to go.
And I guess finally, we have Mr. Soley.
One other question, just talking about different alternatives. A few years back, there was talk about moving the railroad, kind of that south bypass of Fairbanks, and then there was talk about the Foothills route, and it was connecting, I guess, up to this to the bridge down in Delta. Has there been any further study on any of that, and what's the status of any of that realignment discussion?
Let me start with the Delta Junction one. So the Northern Rail extension, of which that bridge to Salcha, the bridge in Salcha, was the first phase. The environmental impact statement has been done on that. The right-of-way has been identified. It's simply a matter of money at this point in time for someone to determine whether that's a going concern. We think that there are opportunities opportunities particularly for the military to make that work, and that's how this whole thing started, really, was the military wanting to access that training land over there. And so we're kind of in a holding pattern. We're not the ones who really make the determination on where the rail is going to go. It's a customer at the other end who says, I want to have rail service here, and then we make that happen. So at the end of the day, if DOD or some other federal department wants to put what did we figure out? It's about $800 million to get from our end of rail down to Delta Junction. It's still a big chunk of change to get that done, and the price gets a little bit higher every day. If they want to move forward on that project, we're behind them, and we think that there's opportunities there, but we certainly aren't the ones to come up with the $800 million to do it. And as far as the straightening of the getting around that south area, that's just a matter of money. It's somebody coming up with the funds to be able to do that. You can see from from where we are, where we're running, $16, $17, $18 million a year that we put back into our maintenance. That doesn't allow for us to have a lot of funding available for large projects like that, what that would take. So it's a matter of somebody else having the will and the want to do that.
At the same time as in 2000, we did the Blue Ribbon study to talk about relocation. We also discussed relocating the railroad yard.
Yep.
You guys got that in the sights at all, or at least contemplating it?
Not really. That's, you know, that's $1 billion issue.
Just added all those tanks over there. They go nowhere.
How much of that billion is just abatement?
I don't know.
I guess the final question I would have had, or would have, would be regarding rail extension down toward Port McKenzie. And has there been any movement on that?
No, there really hasn't. That's, you know, that was a state project through and through. It was, you know, we've got the rail bed built, which, as I understand it, has become a great snow machining trail in the wintertime and a great biking trail in the summer. But you know, that funding just froze up completely several years ago from the state, and the folks in Mat-Su have been looking all over for opportunities, looking for federal grants, looking for some other investors to make that project happen. I know that they spoke quite extensively to the A2A folks because they were interested in the potential for Port McKenzie being an area where material from Asia could come in. They look at that. They look at the problems on the West Coast right now between everywhere from Vancouver to Seattle to Long Beach to San Diego, where ships that come over from Asia get stuck sitting out in the ocean for days because of the bottlenecks at all of those ports. There's no laydown area in any of those anymore. They're all completely clogged up. So the ships spend a couple of days sitting out. It's already a long trip around. They spend a couple of days sitting in the water before they finally get their stuff unloaded and then get shipped into the U.S. One of the things these A2A folks are talking about is that ships coming from Asia to South Central, you know, whether they come into Anchorage or Seward or Whittier or a new port at Point McKenzie, would take at least a day off of that sailing time. And with the amount of laydown yard that Port McKenzie has, there wouldn't be those 2, 3, or 4 day delays that they have sitting out there waiting to get in. And then that, you know, and then they put it on rail and can ship it down to the lower 48, get it all the way to Chicago in about the same amount of time that it's taking them, or less. They could even shave a day off of stuff getting to Chicago as it is going now. So that's one of the big things that they're looking at. It's not just the tar sand oil coming up to be put into the pipeline or exported from here. It's also about freight coming in from Asia and being shipped down to the lower 48.
Is A2A supposed to be double track?
It would have to be over a goodly portion of it for the number of trains they're talking about moving. They're talking about 15 to 18 trains a day. There's a lot of area, and that's, you know, that's one way each, 15 to 18 each way. They'd be having to double track a goodly portion of that.
Okay. Any further questions on those subjects? Okay, thanks, Sully.
And so that's about all I got for right now. We've got, you know, as I mentioned, we've been running around for about 100 years now. We got our centennial coming up in 2023. You know, we'll keep you guys appraised of what we're going to do. I imagine we'll probably do something in Fairbanks, something in Nenana, and make sure that everybody knows that we're still a going concern 100 years later. So thanks for the
last time
opportunity.
you had a big, Tim, last time you had a big soiree, you had Walter Cronkite come up. Who are you going to get to come up this time?
Well, I'll see if Cronkite's available, but I don't think he is.
Got my picture with him down for that one. That was a nice trip.
I think it's interesting, the correlation between the shipping issues and the fact that all of the ports on the West Coast are so full at this point. I was watching the other day about the guy that built the railroad to the Florida Keys because the Panama Canal was gonna set up the situation where these ships were going to need a place to dock, and if there had been a train to Key West, and of course a guy built it and it never materialized. So I think, you know, it's 100 years later, but we're looking at the same issues. It's just it was interesting.
Yeah, Yeah. So Tim, going forward, what, any points you want us to take away from this presentation that's going to affect Fairbanks in the immediate future or this next year?
And is there anything working its way through the legislature we should be aware of? Because they're meeting.
No, nothing at this point. We're, we just want to keep our head down in Juneau at this point in time. So,
Well said.
if you haven't been to Juneau lately, I highly recommend that you don't go.
You don't go. Oh yeah.
Yeah, it's a game of whack-a-mole down there right now, and if you pop your head up, somebody's going to take a swing at it. So, no, I think the thing I'd like to hopefully impart it with you guys is that we're hopeful. We think that things are picking up a little bit. Our freight service to Fairbanks is looking great. Particularly the stuff coming in on the rail barge from Whittier. We're really happy about Petrostar coming in and, switching over to being able to move by rail. We think that's going to be fantastic. And of course, as we have been for a long time, we're really hopeful about LNG and where that's going to go. If there's the opportunity for us to play a part in that, we'd really love to. We think that we can be a real benefit to that operation in the long run in terms of how efficiently and how safely we can move that material and get it up to Fairbanks for you guys. So we think there's a lot of opportunities in Fairbanks. It's always been a major part of what we do, and happy to still, 100 years later, to still be going there.
I do have a question, Tim. This is Jomo. Back to the land issue, and this is more for future reference. How was that advertised? Because I should have known that a big chunk of land, not that I have any money, but that that large swath of good quality land was going to be available. How was it advertised, and how did folks find out about it?
So, in terms of the subdivided parcels, or that we were going to be putting it all up for sale?
Both.
Well, in terms of putting it all up for sale, I have to admit, we had a for lease sign on it until we had the okay for the railroad from the state to sell it. So, in terms of advertising that we were interested in putting it on a list for sale, I guess there wasn't a lot. In terms of the subdivision.
Jim, I guess that.
Hold on, Mr. Green.
Okay.
No,
Please,
go ahead,
on.
Richard. Yeah.
Well, I was just going to say, for going forward, so did the railroad even have to do, that was my point about asking the question initially here. For going for the future, is the railroad, since, are you guys ring fenced and you can go ahead and sell and do whatever you bloody well please? You are not a publicly, we don't have any input to that going forward? Sure. And if we don't have any input to that, that's something that we need to work on with our local people to change, so we can have you have some accountability on how you guys get rid of property, if you know what I mean.
So I guess that's more of a question
Richard,
of how was it determined, which parcel.
So Richard, as I mentioned, we aren't ring fenced on that. We're required to go to the legislature, say exactly what we're selling, say who we're selling it to, and say what we're selling it for. So
and they have to approve. Okay.
And they have to approve it.
Oh, so it wasn't just, hey, we'd like to sell this parcel.
No, and it was passed by the legislature 2 years ago.
Right.
Yeah, they had a lot of, you guys are down there a lot doing that.
That was a lot of detail as far as, what you're going to, as you
So
said, what we want to sell to who.
Right. We had one bill in 2018 that had 8 parcels of land on it. And that was what we had. And it made it through, it went through several committees. It made it through both the House and the Senate. And we had lots of discussions over what we were going to do with that land. This Chena Landings in particular, we had talked about subdividing it and selling it as, residential parcels while we were down there. But that's what our plan was.
But you didn't have identified buyers for the lots or the larger parcels at that time?
No, not for that one. For many of the others we did.
Okay.
For the NeighborWorks property, that we have here in Anchorage, NeighborWorks were the ones who wanted to buy it. The Port of Alaska, the port wanted to buy it. The land in Healy, we had, Usabelli wanted to buy. The land in Healy is interesting. The land in the Tri-Valley subdivision, it's land that we'd been leasing to Usabelli for decades, and people had built houses on them. So we had this whole residential subdivision that, frankly, we don't want to own residential subdivisions. We want to sell them and get out from underneath them. That's not our bailiwick. So we sold it to Usabelli, and as I understand it, all but 2 of them have been sold to the people who live on those parcels of land, which is great. They now own the land underneath their house, which we're happy about.
Got it. Well, again, thank you for that note on the process, because again, it would have beggared the question of how would we have gotten on the front end of that decision to be the buyer, unlike again where it was already identified with the ones further south.
Right.
Okay, interesting. We'll pay closer attention next time.
Yeah, well, hopefully there won't be a next time for a while. that's like I said, Juno, not a fun process.
You just don't want to go through the arduous process. It doesn't mean we don't want your land. Oh, sir. Tim, thanks a million. Are there any further questions? Anything else? Okay. Well, Tim, thank you for a wonderful presentation.
Yeah,
You
good
bet.
hearing your
Thanks,
voice,
Jomo.
Tim.
Thanks for having me. And Richard, I appreciate you coming all the way back from Hawaii for this.
I know, I gotta head back to the airport now.
Now, Tim, can you hand me back control?
I don't
Actually,
know.
don't worry
Maybe.
about it.
Just want to stop the recording.
Or can you just stop the recording?